All right, let's quickly review. Actually, we're just going to pick up. In the book of Timothy, Paul addresses many areas of how church should conduct itself. Remember, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus all are called the pastoral letters. It's written from Paul to two young men, Timothy and Titus, and telling them how to conduct services. You know, if certain problems come up, this is how you can handle it. So not only does it give us an insight of how a church should go, but it actually gives us an insight of how, not as pastors, but as congregates, how we are to act, how we are to perform and all within the church. It just gives you a boundary. And it really is not only, I sound a little loud. Do I sound loud to y'all? Yeah. Bring me down just a little bit. I feel like God kind of feels the word. Oh, yeah, much better, much better. So not only tonight, not only can you get out of here what is expected of a congregation, but it's really a great guidelines for how you manage your life. And tonight is another one of those fundamentals where he is talking to a certain group. He's talking really to widows, but you can get the understanding of what a family is, what a family represents, what's the role of a family, because God has set up so many things in the Bible, in our world, that is centered around family. He calls them the children of Israel. It's just over and over and over. You see that. So we need to know what this kind of gives us an extra insight of what is expected of a family. And so it's funny because we're talking about widows, but it also gives us a little look into the welfare system, how that should run, what are the merits for that. So we can get a lot out of that. So tonight, chapter 5, Paul will address church discipline and the order to how to identify and treat widows within the church. And so the first verse is really good to me. It says, verse 1, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters, with all purity." So hidden here is really what I call kind of a psychological insight of mankind. And what he's basically saying is he's telling you not only how a pastor treats somebody in the congregation, but it's all of us, how we treat. Let's see if I can fix that, because I certainly can hear it. Is that better? This is a newbie. We're trying it out, see if we like it. It actually talks about how, the statement is that however you see a person is how you would treat them. And so he's saying, when you have elderly people, don't teach them, don't look at them and talk to them with disrespect. What you need to do is look at them as they're your father. And he's saying, Timothy, look, when you have the elderly that have more knowledge, they've been through life, they've been through circumstances, they have so much knowledge that we can glean from them, that we should treat them with respect, like you would your dad. And that's what he said. With your dad, don't get on to him publicly. Do it out of love. Would you yell and holler at your father in front of everybody? No, of course not. You would take him aside in respect and talk to him. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, hold these older gentlemen that have wisdom, talk to them. Be gentle to them like you would your father. And it's a sign of respect. So how you look at other people is very important. When you see an elderly person, then treat them like they were your father. He goes on to say, treat young men as though they were your brothers. I'm going to mess this up, aren't I? Treat young men as though they were your brothers. In the world now, when you meet, a man meets a man, it's almost like a competition going on. It's just what can I get out of this relationship or whether. And the Bible tells us that that's not how we do it. That's how the world does it. They try to step on people and get above. But he says, look, when you have a man, your age, and I'm speaking as a man, someone that is your own age, then you need to look at him and take care of him of a brother. I can remember when my kids were growing up, we had this strong requirement of our family, and it was, number one, you don't talk about your sisters and brothers to anybody else. Now, of course, if there was abuse or something, that's that. But you take care of your brothers and sisters. You don't let anybody talk to them. You protect them and you watch over them. You may want to bang them in the head when you get home, but you don't do that. You do not. I mean, it will strongly urge you do not talk about your brothers and your sisters, because they are that. They are your family. And God has set up the family to be the cornerstone of your faith. He set it up from the beginning of time. And so you need to be really careful. If you talk about your brothers, if you talk about your sisters, talk within yourself, within your group. Don't go out and tell everybody, because I'm telling you, especially if you're in a ministry, it will come back and kick you. Because somebody will come up and go, oh, I remember when, don't. Just keep it quiet. Keep your mouth shut. But protect your brother. Then it goes on to say, to treat your mothers as women as mothers. And you know what? This is good too, because so many times in our society, we tend to just push the older people, older women, just out. They're just dumb. They can't even set up their phones. They got to come fix their computers. But you got to remember, they taught you how to pee in a potty. You owe them, or they owe you rather. No, you owe them. You owe them, yeah. So just be nice. Be understanding of them, because they have great wisdom that they can give you. These older women, in fact, in Titus, when we read Titus, that's exactly what Paul says. Paul says, look, stir up these older women and help them to teach the younger women. And I know a lot of women in here do that. I thought when I was reading this, I thought of Brooke and Miss Libby. They live next door. Brooke's young. Miss Libby is a little older. And Brooke takes care of Miss Libby all the time. And Miss Libby, helps babysit and cooks for her. That's how it ought to be. Older women have wisdom. They have brought up their kids. They have gone through crisis and situations. And if you go to them, they will share that with you. I have gotten great understanding and wisdom from the mother figures in my life. I get the wisdom from them. I ask them. If I have a big thing come up, then I ask them and say, what would you do? Da, da. And, even if they're not godly people, as not a lot of mothers are, you can still get wisdom from them. But above all, you have to respect them. You have to respect them. Even if they were terrible parents, terrible fathers, terrible mothers, you have to respect them and take care of them. It doesn't mean you have to move them into your house. It doesn't mean you have to talk to them every day and listen to everything that they ever say. But what it means is you check on them, you take care of them, and when you're talking to them, you give them respect. Because I'm telling you, you will reap what you sow. So be protective. Even if it's not a great relationship, still stay in contact, check in on them, take care of them, give them a respect that is due as a mother and as a father. So the last thing that Paul talks about is he's talking about sisters also. When you have women in the church, this is Paul. He's a young man. He is not married. And he tells them, he says, look, you need to look at these women in your church, these women that are the same age, as your sisters. As a pastor, you can't look at them as girls to have an involvement with them. You have to look at them as sisters. Because the last line he said, in all purity. That's what he's talking about, these sisters. He say, you just be careful with the women in the congregation. It's not that he can't find a wife, but as a rule, he needs to look at all the girls in the congregation, just like all the kids, all the youth in the church. You should not come to church to find you, in the youth that is, find you a husband or a wife. Relax. Just relax. And enjoy each other and get to know each other. That, and I'll use the bad word here. When you take sexual, what would you say, tendencies? Tension out of the equation, you all can become friends. Instead of trying to look for, it'll come. God will provide you. I know anybody has a girlfriend that's going, did just say that. It will come to you. Let's put it that way. In the right time, if you want the proper wife, if you want a godly life, then it will come to you. Don't push it. Let's see. Oh, I do want to tell you this. This is real cool. I was looking at running across the Song of Solomon. I'm trying to read the Song of Solomon and figure out how in the world you teach that, which I don't think we are. How about that for now? But on 3 different occasions, there's a female that represents the bride. She gives some advice to her women friends, and she says, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up nor awaken love until it please. And when I was reading through that, I said, it pretty much is saying, don't artificially encourage romantic involvement. Don't work at it. Don't develop it. It'll come on its own. If you're asking for God for a mate into your life, it will come, won't it, Megan? It will come when you least expect it. But if you're out there looking and looking and looking, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find some that are not made for you, because the devil will bring it up to you. So wait on it. I think that's great advice. Be aware of it, but wait on it. Don't make any foolish decisions. Oh man, I had such a better way of putting that. Now, Paul now turns to the problems of widows. In the book of Acts, we first see where this is a problem because some of the widows were saying, this group of this ethnic group is getting more attention than we're getting. And so there was a fight kind of going on. And so the disciples came in and said, look, Stephen, you take it. It was the first deacons, really. You take this and you distribute what is needed. Well, in this chapter right here, we're going to find out exactly what is the criteria to be a real widow. And when you're looking at this, if you're like me when we read that, you can see the welfare state part of the situation in this also. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go. Remember, in these days when a wife lost her husband, she was desolate. There was nothing she could do if she didn't have family. She couldn't go out and start a business. There was no, life insurance. She was going to have to rely on her family. And if that didn't work out, then the church was going to set in. I was looking, too, a little while ago, and I was reading about the Roman Empire and stuff. And one of the things that struck me is they fostered families. They fostered husband and wife. Nobody in this time period hardly ever didn't have a husband. That was the goal. There was something wrong. There was a curse on your life if you were not saved. Well, the Romans understood the strength in the family unit. Now, and so they encouraged, or you might even say commanded, that everybody get married and they stay married. Now, you could have affairs and do all kind of crazy stuff, but they understood that society, the Roman Empire, was going to live and fall by the family, which is really interesting that even the devil realizes that. It's that family unit that needs to stay together, and it needs to be strong. You have to. It's too easy to get divorced these days. It's just too easy. There are different circumstances, but try as hard as you can to stay together as a family. So here is his word. He's given Timothy a little more, a few more guidelines onto who widows, who could be a widow, who could not. And this is talk about under the umbrella of the church, so the church would take care of them. Verse 3, honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety or devotion at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable for God. So what he's saying is he's making a distinction that not everybody is on the widows list. Not everybody is going to get aid for the widows, for being a widow. There are criteria. It says, but before he goes into that, he says, but one of the biggest one is if this widow has family members, then these family members need to step in and take care of them. It's a repayment for parents. It's a repayment for grandparents. Again, you take care of the elderly. You watch over them. So let's look at the qualifications. They said, let's go on. Verse 5. Now she who is really a widow and left alone, trusts in God and continues in supplication and prayer night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command that they may be blameless. So he's given a distinction of what a true widow should do and what they shouldn't do. One of the things he says that they should do is that, if you have a widow that had money or whatever, or let's put it in our daytime. I think in our time, this will be a lot easier to understand. Now, there's not many poor widows because there's life insurance. And basically what he's saying is if you have a wealthy widow, if she has some way to hold on to her money, maybe through her family, that for the rest of her life, and then we're talking about older widows, that her job, if she can possibly do it, would be to pray, would be to help with the church. She's had her family. She's had her time. Now she needs to devote herself to the church, to watch out for the church, to pray for the church. I remember growing up, there were always 4 or 5 little old ladies that were praying all the time. They were praying for church. They were praying for need. They were there, and they were serving the church. And he's telling them, he's saying, look, these widows, if they have family members, this is what they need to be doing. They need to be in the helps ministry. They need to be praying. They need to be pouring into the younger people. And he says, I think it's interesting what he says. He says, verse 6, but she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. It kind of reminds me of some of these ladies that get, life insurance payments or whatever. They have a life insurance policy, and they go on cruises, and they play games, and they get into a lot of trouble that they don't need. You know, they just party, just do all these things, and they're not giving their service to God. And God says, in this time and period in your life, you need to be serving God. You need to be doing things that the younger kids, the younger widows cannot do. And I think there's so many people that live in a selfish world that they think that their pleasures, it's all about your pleasure. It's all about what you want. It's not all about your pleasure. It's about what you can do. What can you give? How can you serve the Lord who has blessed you with a long life? It's servant. It's funny how those threads, family and being a servant, and giving is just kind of threaded all throughout the Bible. But he says, but she who lives in pleasures is dead. In other words, those that don't do what they're supposed to be are not serving the Lord in their older age, and they're out there just partying and doing whatever, they might as well be dead. That's pretty... In other words, you are not contributing to the work, to the church at all, the body of God at all. But she who lives in pleasure is dead. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. That's pretty strong words. And you know what? That's a great ministry. It's a great ministry. Verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. God's normal way of providing for the needy is not through the church, but through our own hard work. If you don't work, you don't eat. And you know what? That's where it goes over into the welfare system. You know, God says clearly, you don't work, you don't eat. He says if you don't work, then you're idle. And idleness is of the devil. I'm telling you, if you are idle, you will find something to do that is not worthy, that is not righteous. You'll just, out of boredom, you'll do it. You should never be. Nobody should ever sit idle. I don't care who you are, where you are. I don't believe in retirement. There's always something you can do. Always something productive you can do. Especially if you're older, you have a whole family, grandkids, kids, whatever, that you can pour into, that you can pray into. Get you a sheet of paper and write you a list. And when you see problems come up, when you see things happen, if you have sickness in your family, then take that responsibility and bombard heaven with your prayers. That's what you can do. You can't sleep at night? Pray, 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 pray. I mean, I'm telling you, man, God will start dropping stuff in your spirit, and next thing you know, it's morning. It is okay to fall asleep in prayer. It is. In fact, I would say it's almost like medicine. So it says that if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. A husband, in these day and times, even a wife, it is your spiritual duty to take care of your household. That's about as clear as you can. What does it say? But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Exclamation point. I think that's pretty clear. I don't even have to teach on that anymore. And you know what? I thought about when Jesus was on the cross. What did he do? When he was about to die, he looked down to David, down to Mark, and said, Take my mom. This is now your son, mama. Take care of my mama. He did that. He took care of his family. It is your job, man. It really is. It is your job to take care of the family. This is cool too. I read this. Somebody said, this is why when someone is out of work, we can pray with such confidence, knowing it is God's will for them to provide for the needs of their family and through work. I'm going to remember that every time I pray for somebody that's out. It is godly. It is from the Word of God that you have a job and you work and you help your family. It's from God. So when I pray, man, I'm telling you, I love those. I love when people come up with a need that I know the Scripture exactly, and I can say the Word says, boom, it's done. It's done. You just got to go out and find you a job then. Verse 9. Here's some criteria for women, for widows, to be on the church list, to be taken care of. Verse 9, do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number. at this time, 60 people didn't live. People lived into their 60s, rarely 70s and 80s. That's kind of scary, ain't it? Oh, that's 50 people. Just a few more years. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. Wonder how many people would be on that list these days. We got like one widow. But you know what? This is what was required of it. And if we required this of something similar to this of our welfare statute right now in the country, we would have a lot of people off. There would be hardly anybody on. But let's just pick them. The first is they have to be 60 and older. The reason they say that is because, like I said, most people didn't live but into their 60s. So these are the last of their years, and there's really not a whole lot they can do. If they don't have a family, remember that was the first criteria. This is somebody over 60, and then what else it says? And not unless she has been the wife of one man. Now, that means she can only be married one time. That meant she wasn't a carouser. She wasn't, taking her retirement and going and partying and sleeping with other men and all that. She was devoted to her husband who died. That would be a requirement. Well reported of good works. She would have to have a good reputation. If she had brought up children, if she had lodged strangers, if she had washed the saints' feet, if she had relieved the afflicted. In other words, if she had served the community. Basically is what that's saying. Was she right? Was she serving the community? Look, you can look at these things too and measure up in a sense and go, am I doing this? Am I being a righteous person? Am I helping those that really need it? I remember one time we were at the last church we were at, and Pastor Mike he was in charge of giving out the food to the needy. What do you call that? Somebody think of it. Benevolence, that's what it is. And after a while, the church we had just cut it off because it was basically the same 5 people, and they kept driving up in nicer, big nice cars with nice clothes and all that, and they had just learned to game the system. We had found out that they were going from church to church to church to church to church. They weren't needy. They were just basically stealing is what it was. And so they just cut it off. That's because the church is here to help the truly needy. If you help everybody all the time, then everybody becomes weak. They have to work. They have to get better. They have to get self-reliance in their life. Weak people, they just don't cut it. God didn't create any weak people. So they had to have a good reputation and follow over these. Let's see what else we got here. Verse 11. But there are some widows that were not to be supported. Verse 11. But refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. So he's saying, do not refuse the younger widows. Go ahead and encourage them to start over, to marry again, to raise a family. Because if you let these widows, if you prevent these widows from ever marrying, then they become gossipers. And just idleness takes over. And God is not for idleness. You get in a lot of trouble when you're idle. And he's saying, no, they need to remarry. They need to replenish. Is that a word? They need to have children and start a family and keep it on. You know, it's interesting because the Roman Catholic Church get their order of sisters from this verse. You know, the nuns, to where if you want to join the church, you don't get married and you serve the church. And basically what Paul's saying here, he's going, look, refuse these younger ones, because what's going to happen is exactly what has happened within the Catholic Church is these young girls, they go into the ministry and they go, we're never going to get married, we're not going to have any relationships. And then as time goes on, and this is with the priests as well, they decide, oh man, I want to get married now. But they have made a promise, a vow, a sacred vow to God, and now they're going to have to break it in order to do that. And so Paul says, look, don't even let them into this situation. Go ahead and tell them to get married. Go on and tell them to have a family. Because God values, whether you do or not, your vows. I mean, how many people are really more movies than anything? If you heard say, God, if you just get me out of this, I will serve you all the days of their life. And they serve you maybe 2 weeks. You have to be careful because God takes that vow. Just because you flippantly put it off doesn't mean God does. So he's saying, don't do that. They become idle and do things that they should not do. Verse 14. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversaries to speak reproachfully, for some have already turned aside after Satan. Same thing. He's just saying, go ahead and marry. Go ahead. You know, a lot of feminists, this is also the scripture that they can't stand because they think that if you tell a woman to marry, if a woman marries and decides to stay home and take care of her children and her household, that she is just lazy, nothing. I can't tell you how many looks I've got where people go, well, what do you do for a living? I go, well, I stay home with my kids. Oh. There was this one lady, if she'd have said it one more time, every time she'd go, God, well, I have to do both. I have to work and then come home. I go, yeah, that's pretty hard, but don't roll your eyes at me. You know, I'm doing what I believe is right. If you want to go to work and you want to come home, that's fine. That's right for your family. But don't roll your eyes because somebody stays home. Because I'm telling you, 4 kids, homeschooled, stayed at home, that's work, buddy. It's work. So, God says, marry, have your kids. Verse 16. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them. And do not let the church be burdened, that it may be relieve those who are really widows. So he just goes on and he says, look, don't let the church be burdened. Don't put people into the system that don't really need to be in it, because then it burdens the church. And it makes the church have, to take care of somebody, take care of all the widows, takes a lot of money. And saying, look, you families come, take your parents, take your mom, actually is what it's telling, your widows, and take care of them, because you do, the church should not have to be responsible. They will be, but they don't have to. So again, he's just reiterating just the family unit. Take care of your family. That's your strongest allies. They've been with you through everything. Take care of them. You don't, again, have to be with them every day. You know, maybe some of them are just toxic, but you still can be nice to them. You can still have respect for them, and you can still take care of them. Amen? All right, we're going to stop there, and then we'll pick up next week with how to treat your elders. Not elders as in old people, because that would kind of be the same thing. This is some of the leadership within the church, and then we'll go on